The first 3 months were quiet. On Helix Prime, the Council carried on as it always had. Sessions were held. Resolutions were passed. The Valori congratulated themselves on what they called a necessary correction. The Drenathi spoke proudly about stability and balance, and in the hallways between sessions, ambassadors told each other that the humans had taken the decision well. Better than expected, really. No anger, no threats. They simply left. That was the part that should have worried them. On Earth, the recall moved quickly. Military transports jumped to every sector where human teams were deployed. Engineers packed up their tools. Doctors closed their clinics. Agricultural advisors powered down the systems they had spent years building and calibrating for alien soil. They said goodbye to the local populations, many of whom stood and watched with confusion and fear as the humans loaded their shuttles and lifted off. On Talveen 3, the Rixie elder Mivok stood outside the water treatment facility that a human team had built 5 cycles earlier. It was a large structure, simple in design, but deeply effective. It cleaned water for 600 million Rixie across 2 continents. The human engineer who had designed it, a woman named Candace Farrow, had stayed for 3 years to make sure it ran properly. She had trained local technicians. She had written manuals in the Rixie language. She had eaten their food and learned their songs and attended the hatching ceremony of Mivok's grandchildren. Now she was standing at the door of a shuttle with a bag over her shoulder. Mivok walked up to her and placed both of his thin, segmented hands on her arm. "Why?" he asked through the translator clipped to his collar. Candace looked at him for a long time. "Because the council said we are not welcome anymore, Mivok, and I am so sorry." She boarded the shuttle. The door closed. The ship lifted off and disappeared into the gray sky. Mivok stood there until the sound was gone. Then he turned and looked at the water plant and felt, for the first time in his long life, truly afraid. 4 months later, the central filtration unit failed. It was a component that needed a specific polymer replacement part, something the humans had manufactured on site, using portable fabricators they had taken with them. The Rixie engineers tried to fix it. They followed the manuals Candace had left behind, but the part could not be replicated with their technology. They sent a formal request to the Galactic Council for engineering assistance. The Council acknowledged the request and placed it in queue. The estimated response time was 14 weeks. By the 6th week, the water on the eastern continent was undrinkable. By the 10th week, a waterborne disease had spread through 4 major population centers. By the time a council engineering team finally arrived, 18,000 Rixie had died. The engineers who came were Olgari. They studied the human-designed system for 2 weeks, and then reported that they did not fully understand how it worked. Nobody told the humans, but the humans found out anyway. They always did. Commander Nathan Cole sat aboard the Resolute, a human patrol frigate that had been reassigned to border duty along Earth's outer perimeter. He was a quiet man with a square jaw and tired eyes. He had spent 8 years running escort missions along Council trade routes, protecting cargo ships from pirates and guiding lost vessels through unstable jump corridors. Now he sat in orbit around nothing, watching empty space. His communications officer, Ensign Lila Pratt, turned from her console one morning with a look on her face that he did not like. "Sir, I am picking up distress signals. A lot of them." "How many?" 46 in this sector alone. Cargo vessels mostly. They are stranded. Their navigation systems relied on our relay beacons, and when we shut the beacons down as part of the withdrawal, they lost positioning data. Some of them have been drifting for weeks. Nathan stood and walked to the viewport. He could not see the ships from here. They were too far away, scattered across millions of kilometers of dark space. But he could imagine them. Crews sitting in silence, watching their supplies run low, waiting for help that was not coming. Can we forward the beacon data to Council Emergency Services? He asked. Lila nodded. Yes, sir. But Council Emergency Services have a 14-week response backlog. They do not have enough ships. They never did, Nathan said quietly. That is why we were out here. He sat back down. Log the beacons. Forward the data. That is all we are authorized to do. Lila hesitated. Sir, some of those ships have children aboard. Nathan did not look at her. I know, Ensign. Log the beacons. She turned back to her console. The bridge was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems, and the steady pulse of 46 distress signals, blinking on the screen like dying stars. On the agricultural world of Sethara, things were getting worse. The Gorvani had been using a human-designed crop management system for nearly a decade. It was software that analyzed soil chemistry, weather patterns, and water distribution in real time. It had tripled Sethara's food output and turned the planet into the breadbasket for an entire cluster of systems. When the license expired and was not renewed, the software locked. The Gorvani tried to override it. They could not. They tried to build their own version. It took them 4 months, and it did not work. The first harvest without the system failed almost completely. The second was worse. Famine spread from Sethara to 3 neighboring systems. Refugee ships began moving toward Council space. The Council debated emergency food distribution for 6 sessions. By the time they agreed on a plan, 2 of the 3 systems had already begun rationing. On Helix Prime, the mood had changed. The hallways were quieter now. The congratulations had stopped. In the council chamber, the sessions grew tense. Tessic of the Miraline stood during an emergency debate and said what many were thinking, but none had the courage to speak aloud. She was small, even for her species. Her feathers were a dull bronze, and her voice was thin. But when she spoke, the chamber went silent. I stood in this room 18 months ago, and I voted against Resolution 7714. 12 of us did. And I remember what the rest of you said. You said the humans were growing too fast. You said they were dangerous. You said their nature was unstable. And now I stand here, and I look at this council, and I see famine, and plague, and ships drifting in the dark, and worlds falling to military aggression, because the one species that was actually holding this galaxy together was told to leave. She paused. Her feathers lifted slightly. The humans did not break this galaxy when they left. They simply stopped holding it together. And now we are seeing, for the first time, how much of what we thought was our own strength was actually theirs. Gorvash growled from his seat. They wove themselves into everything on purpose. It was a strategy. Tessic turned to him. No, Ambassador. It was generosity. And you mistook it for a trap, because you could not imagine a species that gives without expecting to take. That is not their failure. It is yours. The chamber erupted into argument. Zorath called for order. But the damage was done. The cracks in the council were showing now, deep and wide. And everyone in that room knew that the silence left behind by the humans was louder than anything the galaxy had ever heard. Far away, in a small house in Virginia, Kyle Brannigan sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun come up. His daughter Abby was asleep inside. The morning was cool and still. Birds sang in the trees along the road. His phone buzzed. A message from Megan Holt. Talveen 3 death toll is 18,000. Sethara famine spreading. Council is panicking. He read it twice. Then he put the phone down and picked up his coffee. He did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. But somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where years of patience and quiet dignity had been stored like fuel, he felt a small, hard flame of something that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. It was the feeling of being proven right, and it tasted like ash. 1 year after the vote, the galaxy did not collapse with a bang. It sagged. It bent. It cracked slowly, the way a bridge cracks when you pull out the supports one by one, and pretend the weight was never there. The Jarathi hegemony moved first. They were a militaristic species, aggressive and territorial, with a fleet of 90 warships and an appetite for expansion that had been kept in check for decades by one thing: the presence of human patrol ships along the neutral corridors. Those corridors were empty now. The Jarathi ambassador had never spoken much during council sessions. He had not needed to. His species preferred action to words. Within 3 weeks of the last human ship leaving the border sectors, Jarathi cruisers crossed into Pelori space and took their orbital station, the same station that human engineers had rebuilt after an asteroid strike 4 years earlier. The Pelori sent a distress call to the council. The council held a debate. The debate lasted 2 days. By the time they passed a resolution condemning the invasion, the Jarathi had already moved on to the Keth mining colonies. The Keth were a quiet, peaceful species with no military to speak of. They had always relied on the council's protection framework, which in practice had meant human ships and human crews standing between them and anyone who wanted their resources. Now, there was no one standing there at all. 40,000 Keth were displaced in a single week. Their mining platforms were seized. Their government sent a desperate message to Earth. The message reached the desk of Admiral Vince Hartley at the Pentagon. He was a stocky man with a shaved head and a reputation for saying exactly what he meant. He read the Keth transmission, then walked it into the Oval Office and placed it in front of President Nora Beckett. The Jarathi have taken Pelori and Keth. They are pushing toward the Tessic homeworld. The Miraline have no fleet worth mentioning. If the Jarathi reach them, it will be a slaughter. Nora read the message. What has the council done? They issued a formal condemnation, strongly worded. And their defense fleet? 18 ships. Half of them are older than I am. The Jarathi would go through them in an afternoon. Danny Greer stood near the window, his arms crossed. We have 400 combat-ready vessels. We do, Nora said, and 31 species voted to tell us that was a problem. The room was quiet. Nora set the message down and looked at Hartley. We are not going back in, Vince. Not yet. Not like this. If we ride in now and save them, we become the protector they never asked for and never thanked. We become the thing they accused us of being. Hartley nodded slowly. I understand, ma'am, but people are dying. I know. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. Not on us. On the other side of the galaxy, a different kind of disaster was unfolding. A plague had broken out on the Dranathi outer colonies. It was a respiratory pathogen, fast-moving and vicious, and it hit their population hard. The Dranathi immune system was powerful against most diseases, but this one was different. It mutated quickly, jumping between hosts and changing its structure every few days. 3 years earlier, a team of human epidemiologists had flagged this exact type of pathogen during a joint survey of the Dranathi border worlds. They had noted the risk and proposed a collaborative research program to develop a preventive vaccine. The Dranathi had refused. Gorvash himself had called it an excuse for human biological espionage. He had said, in front of the full council, that allowing human scientists access to Dranathi genetic data would be like handing a predator the keys to your home. Now the predator was a virus, and it did not care about politics. The Dranathi Medical Corps worked around the clock. They were skilled and dedicated. But they had never dealt with a pathogen that evolved this quickly. Their standard treatment slowed it down, but did not stop it. Within 2 months, the death toll on the outer colonies passed 50,000. Gorvash sat alone in his quarters on Helix Prime, and did something he had never done before. He wrote a private message to Kyle Brannigan. Ambassador Brannigan, I find myself in a position I did not expect. Our outer colonies are facing a medical crisis that our own scientists cannot resolve. I believe your people may have research that could help. Perhaps an informal arrangement could be discussed. This need not involve the council. Kyle received the message at his kitchen table in Arlington. His daughter Abby was across from him, working on a school project about ocean currents. She had glue on her fingers and papers spread across the table. The house smelled like the pasta he had made for dinner. He read the message once. Then he read it again. Then he closed his eyes and breathed out slowly through his nose. Abby looked up. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Just thinking." He opened his laptop and typed a reply. "Ambassador Gorvash, I appreciate you reaching out. However, I am no longer serving in a diplomatic capacity. I left the Foreign Service 6 months ago. I would suggest you direct your request to the Galactic Council, as they are now responsible for medical coordination within their membership. I truly wish the Drenathi people good health and a swift recovery." He looked at Abby's project for a while, and helped her label the Atlantic and Pacific. He did not mention the message. He did not mention the 50,000 dead on worlds he had once visited as a guest and a friend. That night, after Abby was asleep, he sat on the porch and called Megan Holt. "I got a message from Gorvash," he said. "I know. I got one too. He's reaching out to anyone who might listen," Megan replied. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing you did, probably. That we cannot help, that he should ask the council." Kyle was quiet for a moment. 50,000, Megan. "I know. People I met. Families I ate dinner with on Drenath 4. Kids who showed me their school. They are dying because their ambassador was too proud to let us help when it mattered." Megan's voice was soft. "That is not your fault, Kyle, but it does not feel like it is not my fault either." On Helix Prime, the council chamber had become a place of blame. Every session turned into a shouting match. The smaller species accused the larger ones of arrogance. The Drenathi accused the Valori of misleading them about the consequences of the resolution. The Valori accused everyone of overreacting. Through all of it, Tessic of the Miraline sat quietly in her seat and watched. She had stopped making speeches. There was no point anymore. Everyone knew she had been right. Saying it again would not bring back the dead or rebuild what had been lost. One evening, after a particularly bitter session, she found Zorath standing alone in the observation gallery. His crystalline form was dim, almost gray. She had known the Valori long enough to understand that this meant something close to exhaustion, or perhaps despair. "High Speaker," she said. "Ambassador Tessic. The Jarathi have taken a third system. The Drenathi plague is spreading, and we have lost 4 more cargo convoys to navigation failures in the dark corridors. I am aware. Then what will you do?" Zorath was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I made a mistake, Tessic. I believed that stability meant control. I believed that if we contained the humans, the galaxy would find its balance. Instead, I removed the only thing that was keeping it balanced." Tessic looked out at the stars. "Knowing you made a mistake is the first step, High Speaker. The second step is harder." "What is the second step?" "Asking them to come back, and accepting that they may say no." Zorath's light flickered. "Do you think they will say no?" She thought about Kyle Brannigan, standing in the council chamber, with his hands behind his back, his face calm, his voice steady, absorbing the insult of 31 votes without raising his voice. She thought about the human engineers on Talveen 3, the doctors on Drenath 4, the pilots who had flown patrol routes through pirate territory for years, without complaint. "No," she said. "I do not think they will say no. But I think they will make us earn it, and I think we deserve that." Zorath dimmed further. He said nothing. The stars turned outside the window, cold and indifferent, and somewhere in the dark between them, ships drifted without beacons, and worlds burned without help, and the galaxy that had told humanity to leave was slowly learning the price of its pride. 18 months after the vote, 3 ships appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. They were council vessels, sleek and polished, carrying flags of diplomatic passage. They did not come fast. They did not come with weapons charged. They came slowly, carefully, the way a person walks into a room where they know they are not sure they are welcome. Aboard the lead vessel was a delegation of 22 species. Zorath of the Valerai was there. Gorvash of the Drenathi was there, though he had not spoken much since leaving Helix Prime. Tessic of the Miraline was there, standing near the observation window, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. She had never been to the human homeworld. None of them had. In all the years of council membership, no delegation had ever visited Earth. The humans had always come to them. That fact, which had once seemed natural and unremarkable, now felt like something else entirely. The ships were hailed by a human communications relay at the edge of the system. A calm, professional voice said, "Council delegation, you are cleared for diplomatic approach to Earth. Standard quarantine and customs protocols will apply. Please reduce speed and follow the beacon path to orbit. Welcome to Sol." Tessic noticed that the voice said welcome. She also noticed that it did not say welcome back. The delegation was brought to the surface by shuttle and escorted to the United Nations complex in Geneva. The building was old by galactic standards, but elegant, surrounded by green lawns and trees that were beginning to turn gold with autumn. Tessic had never seen trees change color before. She stared at them through the window of the transport vehicle and thought they looked like they were burning very slowly and very beautifully. Inside, a conference room had been prepared. Long table, simple chairs, water and coffee set out. Nothing grand, nothing designed to impress. The humans had not decorated or prepared a spectacle. They had set out a table and some chairs, and that was it. President Nora Beckett entered the room with a small team. Danny Greer was at her side. Paul Redmond stood near the door. Secretary of State Claire Nolan took a seat at the table and opened a folder. And beside her, in a gray suit with no tie, sat Kyle Brannigan. He was not there as an ambassador. He was there as a civilian advisor. But when Gorvash saw him, the Drenathi's eyes dropped to the floor, and he did not look up for a long time. Megan Holt stood behind Kyle, near the wall. She wore a navy suit and carried no datapad this time. She did not need one. She was there because Kyle had asked her to be, and because she wanted to see the faces of the people who had voted her species out of the galaxy. Zorath spoke first. His crystalline form was brighter than it had been in months, polished for the occasion, though Tessic thought it still looked thinner than it should. President Beckett, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I am here to formally request the reinstatement of humanity as a full member of the Council, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities restored to their previous standing. Nora looked at him. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at someone who has finally said the things she knew they would eventually say. High Speaker, she began. 18 months ago, your council held a vote. 31 species decided that humanity was growing too fast, building too many ships, and becoming too powerful. We were told that our nature was destabilizing. We were told, in so many words, that we were a threat. We accepted that judgment. We came home. We closed our doors. She paused. The room was very still. In our absence, worlds have starved. Plagues have spread without treatment. Shipping lanes have collapsed. Navigation beacons have gone dark. At least 2 species have lost sovereign territory to military aggression that went unchallenged because there was no one left to challenge it. 18,000 Rixi died from contaminated water. 50,000 Drenathi died from a plague that our scientists tried to help prevent 3 years before it happened. Gorvash flinched. It was small, but everyone in the room saw it. Nora continued. So you will forgive me, High Speaker, if I do not simply say yes. Zorath inclined his head. We understand, President Beckett. The Council recognizes that the original resolution was based on incomplete analysis. Kyle leaned forward. He had not planned to speak, but the words came anyway, quiet and measured, the way they always did. Ambassador Gorvash, High Speaker, with respect, it was not based on incomplete analysis. It was based on fear. The room shifted. Several of the alien delegates turned to look at him. You are afraid of us, Kyle said. Many of you still are, and I understand that. We are a young species. We are loud and fast and sometimes reckless. We have a history that includes terrible violence against each other and against our own world. But the resolution was not a response to data. It was a response to discomfort. You looked at us and saw something that did not fit your models, something that moved too quickly, adapted too easily, and refused to slow down when you told us to. And instead of asking why we were that way, you decided to push us aside. The silence that followed was heavy. Tessic spoke from her seat at the end of the table. Her voice was soft. He is right. Those of us who knew it at the time were not loud enough. That failure belongs to us as much as to anyone. Nora stood. She placed her hands flat on the table and looked down the length of it, meeting the eyes of every ambassador in the room. Here is what humanity requires before we will consider returning to the Council. She held up one finger. First, a formal public acknowledgement by the full Council that Resolution 7714 was in error. Not a quiet revision, not a bureaucratic adjustment. A public statement, broadcast to all 47 member worlds, admitting that the resolution was wrong and that its consequences caused preventable suffering. She held up a second finger. Second, a restructuring of the Council's voting system. No single block of species will ever again be able to demote or expel a member through a simple majority. Any such motion will require a 2/3 supermajority and a 60-day review period, during which the affected species has the right to present a defense. A third finger. Third, the establishment of a joint crisis response framework, co-led by humanity, with permanent authority to deploy aid, medical, and security resources to any member world in distress. This framework will not be subject to Council debate or delay. When people are dying, the response will be immediate. Zorath's light flickered rapidly. These are significant demands, President Beckett. They are, Nora said, and they are not negotiable. We will not put ourselves in a position where we pour our people, our resources, and our goodwill into a galaxy that can turn on us with a show of hands. Not again. Not ever. She sat down. Claire Nolan slid a bound document across the table. Danny Greer placed identical copies in front of each delegation member. The document was clean, precise, and thorough. It had been written months ago. The humans had known this moment was coming. They had been ready. Kyle looked at Gorvash. The Dranathi ambassador was reading the document slowly, his thick fingers turning pages with surprising care. Kyle felt something twist in his chest. Not anger, not triumph, something sadder and more complicated. Ambassador Gorvash, he said quietly. Gorvash looked up. I read your message. The one you sent about the plague. I want you to know that not answering was the hardest thing I have ever done. Gorvash stared at him. For a moment, his hard, scaled face seemed to soften, just slightly, around the edges. Then why did you not answer, Brannigan? Because if I had, nothing would have changed. You would have taken the help and gone back to the way things were. And the next time you were afraid of us, you would have done the same thing all over again. Sometimes, the only way to teach someone what you are worth is to let them feel what it is like when you are gone. Gorvash said nothing. He looked back down at the document. Nora stood one final time. Take it to your council. Read it. Debate it. Take as long as you need. We are not going anywhere. She walked out of the room. Her team followed. The delegations sat in silence, surrounded by copies of a document that was not a treaty and not a demand, but something in between. Something that said, very clearly and very quietly, that humanity was willing to come back, but only if the galaxy was willing to change. Outside, the trees were still turning gold. Tessic watched them through the window for a long time before she followed the others back to the shuttle. She thought the humans had chosen this season on purpose. A season of change. A season where beautiful things let go of what they were and became something new. It took 3 months. 3 months of debate, argument, and late-night sessions on Helix Prime. 3 months of delegations shouting at each other across the chamber floor, while Zorath tried to hold the room together with a patience that was wearing thinner by the day. Some species resisted. The Olgari Collective called the human demands arrogant. The Feldrothi said the voting reforms would weaken the Council's ability to act quickly. A handful of smaller species worried quietly that co-leading a crisis framework with humans would mean being overshadowed entirely. But the numbers did not lie. The famine on Sethara had spread to 5 systems. The Jarathi had taken a 4th colony world, and were showing no signs of stopping. The Drenathi plague had killed 78,000 people, and every day, more distress signals blinked in the dark corridors where human relay beacons had once kept ships safe and moving. 41 in favor of accepting humanity's terms. 4 against. 2 abstentions. The same chamber that had voted to push humanity out now voted overwhelmingly to bring them back. Zorath read the public acknowledgement himself. It was broadcast across all 47 member worlds, transmitted in every language the Council recognized. He stood at the center of the chamber floor, the same spot where Kyle Brannigan had stood 18 months earlier, and he spoke slowly and carefully. The Galactic Council acknowledges that Resolution 7714, which reduced humanity's status to Provisional Observer, was an error in judgment. This resolution was driven not by evidence of wrongdoing, but by unfounded fear of a species whose primary actions within this body were acts of service, generosity, and cooperation. The consequences of this resolution have been severe and far-reaching. Lives have been lost, worlds have suffered, trust has been broken. The Council accepts full responsibility for these outcomes, and commits to the structural reforms necessary to ensure that such an error is never repeated. His light was dim when he finished. Those who knew the Violori said it was the closest their kind ever came to shame. The restructured voting charter was ratified 2 weeks later, with only 2 dissenting votes. The Joint Crisis Response Framework, which the humans had named the Unity Accord, was signed in a formal ceremony on Helix Prime. Kyle Brannigan stood on one side of the signing table. Tessic stood on the other. They had spent weeks working together on the framework's design, and in that time they had become something that neither of them had expected. Friends, when Kyle signed the document, Tessic placed her small feathered hand on his arm. "You are a good man, Kyle Brannigan," she said quietly, "and your species does not get told that enough. We do not do it for the compliments, Tessic. I know. That is what makes it worth saying." On the day humanity's full member status was officially restored, the galaxy began to move again. Commander Nathan Cole brought the Resolute back to its old patrol route along the neutral corridors. He had not been there in over a year, and the space felt different now. Emptier, scarred. Wreckage from pirate attacks drifted in the shipping lanes. Abandoned cargo containers tumbled slowly in the void. Ensign Lila Pratt sat at her console and powered up the navigational relay beacons one by one. Each beacon came online with a soft chime that filled the bridge. Green lights appeared on the map display, spreading outward like a heartbeat returning to a body that had gone still. Within hours, stranded cargo ships began to move. Captains who had been drifting for months received positioning data and plotted courses to the nearest port. Some of them sent messages of thanks. Some of them just moved, silently and gratefully, toward safety. Nathan stood at the viewport and watched the first convoy pass. 12 ships, loaded with food and medical supplies, heading for the famine zones. He did not say anything. Lila looked at him and saw that his eyes were bright, and she looked away to give him this privacy. On Talvine 3, a shuttle landed outside the water treatment facility. The ramp lowered, and a team of human engineers walked out into the warm, humid air. At the front of the team was Candace Farrow. She had volunteered the moment the recall was lifted. She had not hesitated for even a second. Mivok was waiting for her. He was older now, thinner, and there were marks on his carapace that had not been there before. The marks of grief, in his species. He stood very still as she approached, and when she stopped in front of him, he reached out with both of his segmented hands and held her arm the same way he had the day she left. "You came back," he said through the translator. "Of course I came back," she said. "We did not vote against you. I want you to know that." Candace put her hand over his. "I know, Mivok, and we would have come anyway." Her team went to work. They had brought new parts, new fabricators, and updated designs. The filtration unit was repaired in 9 days. Clean water flowed again across the eastern continent. And for the first time in almost a year, Rixie children drank without fear. On the Drenathi homeworld, a joint medical team set up a research lab in the capital city. Dr. Sam Everett, a human virologist with a gentle voice and steady hands, led the effort. He worked alongside Drenathi scientists who had been fighting the plague for months and were running on almost no sleep. He did not criticize their methods. He did not point out that this could have been prevented. He simply rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Within 6 weeks, they had a working vaccine. It was not perfect, but it was effective, and production began immediately. Gorvash came to the lab on the day the first doses were administered. He stood in the doorway and watched Sam Everett inject a young Drenathi child while her mother held her still. Afterward, Gorvash walked up to Sam. He towered over the human by nearly a full meter. His face was hard and unreadable. "Thank you," he said. The words sounded rough in his throat, like it had been dragged up from somewhere deep. Sam looked up at him. "You are welcome, Ambassador." Gorvash stood there a moment longer. Then he turned and walked to the council chamber, where he requested time to address the full body. When it was granted, he stood at the center of the floor and said in a voice that did not waver, "I was wrong about them. I do not say that easily. I will not forget that I was wrong, and I will not forget what it cost. But I am saying it now, in front of all of you, because it needs to be said." He sat down. Nobody spoke for a long time. In her office in Washington, Nora Beckett watched the feeds from across the galaxy. Aid ships launching from human stations, beacons lighting up in the dark corridors, trade routes reopening, cargo moving, medicine flowing, engineers landing on broken worlds with toolkits and patience, and the quiet, stubborn determination that had always defined her species. Danny Greer stood beside her desk, watching the same feeds. "It is working," he said. "It was always going to work," Nora said. "This is what we do." Danny was quiet for a moment. "And next time?" Nora looked at him. "Next time they will think twice before they tell us to leave." Danny nodded. "Good." On Helix Prime, the stars turned outside the observation gallery windows. Kyle Brannigan stood there alone, looking out at the galaxy he had once represented, and then walked away from, and was now a part of again. The light from distant suns fell across his face, and he thought about all the things that had happened in the past 18 months. The vote, the silence, the collapse, the long, painful road back to this moment. He heard footsteps behind him. Small, light, careful. He knew who it was before she spoke. Tessic stood beside him. Her head barely reached his shoulder. Her feathers were smooth and bright, healthier than they had been in months. "You could have refused to come back," she said. "You could have let it all fall apart. No one would have blamed you." Kyle shook his head slowly. "Some people would have. And besides, that is not why we came out here in the first place." "Why did you come out here?" He thought about it. He thought about the first human ship that had broken through the light barrier and found a galaxy full of ancient civilizations who looked at them with curiosity and suspicion and wonder. He thought about the thousands of men and women who had left Earth to build water plants and design crop systems and cure diseases on worlds they would never call home. He thought about Candace Farrow kneeling in the dirt on Talveen 3, teaching Rixie engineers how to read a filtration gauge. He thought about Sam Everett holding a Drenathi child's arm steady, while her mother whispered something soft and worried. "Because the stars were there," he said, "and someone needed help reaching them." Tessic ruffled her feathers gently. It was the Miraline equivalent of a laugh, warm and quiet. "Your species is strange, Kyle Brannigan." He laughed. "Yeah, we get that a lot." They stood together at the window and watched the galaxy turn. It was the same galaxy it had always been, old and vast and full of species who had been traveling the stars for millennia before humans had even learned to make fire. But it felt different now, fuller, warmer. Not because the humans had come back with warships or ultimatums or demands for gratitude, but because they had come back with water purifiers and crop software and vaccines and open hands. Because they had come back the same way they had first arrived, not asking for power or praise, but simply looking for someone who needed help and offering it without conditions. And the galaxy, for all its age and wisdom and accumulated knowledge of 1,000 civilizations, had learned something that humanity had always known. That the measure of a people is not how dangerous they can be when they are angry. It is how much they are willing to give when they do not have to. The stars did not care who was powerful, but they remembered who was kind. And out there, in the dark between the stars, the beacons were shining again. The council chamber on Helix Prime was enormous. It stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral, with curved walls made of pale metal and soft blue light pouring down from above. 47 species had seats in that room. 47 civilizations, each one older than humanity by thousands of years. Their ambassadors sat in tiered rows, watching the floor below with the kind of calm patience that came from centuries of politics. Ambassador Kyle Brannigan stood at the center of that floor. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and steady hands. He had served Earth's diplomatic corps for 22 years, and he had learned long ago that the trick to surviving alien politics was simple. Listen more than you speak, and never ever let them see you sweat. His aide, Lieutenant Megan Holt, stood 2 steps behind him. She was younger, sharper, and less patient. She held a datapad against her chest and kept her jaw tight. She already knew what was coming. They both did. The Valori High Speaker, Zorath, rose from his seat at the top of the chamber. He was tall and thin, his body made of something like living crystal. When he spoke, his voice rang through the room like a bell struck underwater. The matter before this council is Resolution 7714, the formal reduction of humanity's membership status from full member to provisional observer. A murmur passed through the chamber. Some of the smaller species shifted uncomfortably. The Miraline ambassador, a bird-like creature named Tessic, closed her eyes. Zorath continued. The resolution has been put forward by the Valori delegation, with support from the Drenathi hegemony and the Olgari collective. The concerns are as follows. Humanity's rate of expansion has exceeded all projected models. Their fleet has grown from 12 vessels at the time of first contact to over 200 in just 60 standard cycles. Their colonial footprint now spans 4 sectors, and they have repeatedly declined to submit military blueprints for council inspection. Kyle stepped forward. He spoke clearly and without anger. High Speaker, I want to address each of those points. Our expansion has been entirely within unclaimed space. We have not taken a single world that any other species had marked or settled. Our fleet growth reflects our population growth, nothing more. And regarding the military blueprints, no other species in this chamber has been asked to hand over their defense designs. We declined because the request was not applied equally. Gorvash, the Dranathi ambassador, leaned forward. He was massive, with dark green scales and a voice like grinding stone. You build too fast, human. You breed too fast. You change too fast. 60 cycles ago, your people were still burning dead plants for energy. Now you have ships that match our own. That is not natural. Ambassador Gorvash, we shared our medical technology with your outer colonies when the Sethran fever broke out. We sent engineers to rebuild the Pelori orbital station after the asteroid strike. We designed crop systems for 12 worlds that could not feed themselves. We did all of that freely, without being asked twice. And now you stand here and tell us that our ability to help is the reason we should be pushed aside. Gorvash said nothing, but he did not look away either. The vote was called. Each species cast their decision through their console. The numbers appeared on the central display, one by one. 31 in favor of the resolution, 12 against, 4 abstentions. It was done. Megan's grip on the datapad tightened until her knuckles went white. Kyle did not move. He stood there for a long moment, looking around the chamber. He looked at the Rixie delegation, the small insectoid species whose water systems his people had built. They had abstained. He looked at the Gorvani, whose farms ran on human software. They had voted yes. He looked at Tessic, who had voted no, and whose feathers were pressed flat against her skull in what he had learned was a sign of deep distress. Then he spoke. His voice was calm. The Council has made its decision. Humanity accepts the result. We will comply with all terms of the resolution. We wish this body well. He turned and walked out. Megan followed. The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. In the corridor, Megan caught up to him. Kyle, that is it? We just walk away? He kept walking. His shoes clicked on the polished floor. Yes. They just stripped us of our seat. After everything we gave them. After every mission, every aid package. Every single time we showed up when nobody else would. And we just accept it? Kyle stopped. He turned to look at her. His face was still calm, but his eyes were not. We do not argue with people who have already made up their minds, Megan. We leave. And we take everything we brought with us. She stared at him. Then she understood. Back on Earth, 14 hours later, President Nora Beckett sat behind her desk, in the Oval Office. The room was quiet. The curtains were drawn. On the screen in front of her, the full recording of the Council vote played on a loop. She had watched it 3 times already. Danny Greer, her chief of staff, stood near the door. He was a careful man who chose his words like a surgeon chose instruments. The public does not know yet. We have maybe 6 hours before the press picks it up. Secretary of Defense Paul Redmond sat in the chair across from her. He was broad-shouldered and still, like a man waiting for an order he already knew was coming. Nora leaned back. How many human personnel are currently deployed on Council-affiliated worlds? 14,000, give or take. Medical teams, agricultural advisors, engineering corps, cultural liaisons. Plus another 6,000 aboard ships running patrol or logistics support along Council trade routes. Pull them all back. Danny paused. All of them? Every single one. Every doctor, every engineer, every pilot. Every piece of equipment we loaned or licensed under Council partnership agreements. If we built it, we take it back. If we designed it, we revoke the license. If we are running it, we shut it down. Paul Redmond uncrossed his arms. That is going to hurt a lot of people, Madam President. Some of those worlds depend on our systems entirely. Nora looked at him. They voted to call us a threat, Paul. 31 species looked at everything we gave them and decided we were too dangerous to sit at the table. So we stopped giving. We come home. And we let the galaxy see what it looks like without us. Danny set his tablet down. The council will say we are retaliating. We are not retaliating. We are complying. They reduced our status. Provisional observers do not run aid missions or patrol foreign space. We are simply following the rules they set. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over Washington. The sky was orange and gold. Somewhere out there, 20,000 humans were about to be called home from a galaxy that did not want them anymore. Draft the recall order, Nora said quietly. Effective immediately. Danny picked up his tablet and left the room. Paul followed. Nora stayed at the window for a long time, watching the light fade. She did not feel angry. She felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, she felt something else. A cold, patient certainty that the galaxy had just made the worst mistake in its long and ancient history, and that it would not take long for them to figure that out.